Good morning. Today, the Minnesota House of Representatives is preparing to pass legislation that will provide a salary increase for 350,000 Minnesota workers by 2015. The bill before us today will raise the minimum wage for large employers to $9.50 an hour by August 2015. It's important that Minnesota finally take a step forward on the minimum wage. We are one of 6 states that have a minimum wage less than the federal minimum wage. It has not been raised since 2005, and more today's economy is producing worse jobs for low-wage workers. As of March of this year, we have a lot of job openings, 59,000 job openings, but 40% of those job openings are part-time, and the median wage for part-time job openings is $9.41 an hour. That means that of the jobs that we have out there and available for workers today, a large share of those jobs are part-time jobs that pay $9.41 or less per hour. The economic recovery that Minnesota is experiencing is much like the rest of the country. On paper, it looks like we are enjoying some modest job growth. It looks like the economy is gaining ground, but the overwhelming majority of the benefits of that job recovery are going to the highest paid workers in the economy. People like lawyers, like me, rather than people who actually have to work hard for a living, like hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans who would benefit from this bill today. So we hope that this action today by the Minnesota House will spur action in the Minnesota Senate, and that we will present a minimum wage increase to Governor Dayton for signature within the next 2 weeks. That's it.
The governor's going to have this on his desk in 2 weeks. You have to work out some big differences with the Senate. Is that easily done?
Mary, the working out differences with the Senate is what we do for the last 2 weeks of session, and the minimum wage difference is not the only one we're facing. So I expect that we'll be able to reach a compromise with them that will work.
Representative, the business community is mounting some fierce opposition to this. They say that it is going to be extremely costly, will result in job loss, and make force some businesses to close. Will you address that?
Sure. Well, first of all, the business community has been saying that about the minimum wage since 1938 when Franklin Roosevelt signed it into law. They said it in the 1980s in Minnesota when we increased the minimum wage. They said it in the early 1990s. They said it in 2005. They said it in 2007 when the federal government increased the minimum wage. The last minimum wage increase in Minnesota was a result of federal action signed by George Bush. The previous action in Minnesota was signed into law by Governor Pawlenty, and the one before that was by Arne Carlson. If this is such an anti-business bill, I don't know why those Republican governors would have signed it. But the fact is that the history and experience with the minimum wage shows that this does not hurt jobs. In fact, the vast majority of economic research indicates zero net job loss as a result of increasing the minimum wage. And the reason is basic economics. Low-wage workers need all the money that they can earn to meet basic necessities of life. When they get an extra dollar in their pocket, they spend it right away to cover basic needs. That dollar gets multiplied through the economy, and businesses benefit because the demand for the goods and services they sell goes up significantly. So while businesses understandably look at the additional cost of raising the minimum wage might have in their business, what they don't see very easily is the increase in demand for the things that they're selling. And that's why job losses don't result, even though they're threatened or they're warned about every time.
You use the phrase zero net job loss. Does that mean some jobs would be lost, but overall it's not?
Well, every day in the economy, jobs are lost and jobs are gained. Businesses that employ minimum wage workers fail every day, and some succeed. I mean, there is a huge amount of churn and turnover in the economy. So you can't just take one date in time and say, this is the impact of the minimum wage, and these 5 jobs were lost because of it. You have to look at the aggregate number, and every time the wage goes up, there is no increase in job loss as a result of that.
The hospitality industry is going to be pushing this amendment that would blend tips and minimum wage. And they're saying it's not a tip credit. Do you see it as just that by another name?
Well, what the hospitality industry is pushing is a provision that would allow hospitality companies to pay tipped workers less than the standard minimum wage. So in that sense, it's a tip credit. The concern about that proposal, however, is, number one, it has not been used in any other state before, so it's untested. And number two, it's fairly cumbersome. For every pay period, employers would have to calculate the average or the hourly wage for every employee. And if they are below $12, the employer would then have to increase their base salary up to the minimum wage standard. So it's an extremely cumbersome method for calculating a difference in wages, and I think it's just not workable and it's untested.
The industry obviously backs it. They don't think it's too cumbersome. Why are you wiser than they are?
Well, I think they think it's a good political compromise. I think they would like to see some kind of tip penalty or tip credit put into law. They think that Democrats are less likely to just have an outright reduction in hourly wages for tipped employees, and so I think they see this as an in-between. I think the challenge is it's a good political, legislative compromise. I'm not sure that it actually is something that works in the real world.
Passes onto your bill, how will you react to it?
If a tip credit passes onto the bill, I will seriously consider waiting to pass the bill and bring it back another day.
What about the 48-hour overtime limit? Are you still against? I assume you are. If you are, why? And do you think it's still going to go on? A lot of people think it will go on today.
Well, most people don't realize that Minnesota's overtime law is 48 hours instead of 40 hours. People in a lot of industries and a lot of sectors fall under the federal 40-hour requirement. But one exception to that is agriculture workers. And the bill today would create a 40-hour overtime requirement for ag workers. People in agribusiness and the ag industry have concerns about that. My personal view is I don't understand why agriculture workers should be treated to a lesser standard of overtime than any other worker in any other industry. I know that the amendment will be offered. I don't support it, but obviously there are a lot of rural legislators in both the House and in both the DFL and Republican caucuses, so I would not be surprised to see it go on.
And is that something you could support in the conference committee, or would you continue to try getting it to 48 or 40?
Well, it's the 40-hour agriculture requirement is not the top priority in this bill. The top priority for me is raising the minimum wage. So I would still fight for it, but I'm not sure what its ultimate fate will be.
And what about, how does this affect your area where you grew up? Rural areas tend not to pay as much. Is this going to hurt those areas while it may help where you live now?
Well, actually, I think in a lot of ways, raising the minimum wage, in the area I grew up was Bemidji. And we don't know that. Well, I don't know if everyone knows that. But, yeah, there are a lot. And in fact, if you look at job openings, the median wages are considerably lower in greater Minnesota. And the fact is that when low-wage workers in those areas get a raise, more of that money is going to be directly spent in hopefully small local businesses, hopefully not just in big-box retail. But that money gets recycled just as quickly through a small town as it does through a big city. And so I think the economic benefit of increasing demand for goods and services by having more money in low-wage workers' pockets will be just as, if not more, pronounced in a small town. All right. Thank you.
Talk about, just briefly, I have two other things. One is, how many workers are fall under the federal minimum wage?
Well, right now there are 93,000 Minnesota workers who make $7.25 or less per hour. And so the number, we don't calculate how many people are technically falling under that minimum wage because a lot of them are above it. The reason why we look at a number of 350,000 people getting a pay increase is because there are a lot of people making between $7.25 and $9.50, all of whom would be moving up if this bill goes through.
So even if federal law governs an employer, this takes precedence because it's higher?
Yep, the state, it's the minimum wage is the greater of the state or local, depending on the exemptions and so forth.
The other one is the ongoing inflator after 15. What type of a raise are we thinking about, just in terms of dollars and cents, if it's an average year?
Well,
here's an idea.
There's going to be an amendment today on the floor that will cap that inflationary increase at 2.5%, and the 20-year average of inflation is 2.5%, as it so happens. So we are looking at a max of 2.5%. Obviously, in these economic conditions, the inflation rate is significantly less. But what the history of the minimum wage has been that we have increased it, and then it stayed flat for 5 to 10 years, and then we jerk it up again. And businesses are waiting to find out how the political winds blow at the state capitol for the minimum wage, rather than having something predictable which is what an inflationary adjustment would do. All right, thank you.